want to thank you all for being with us today. This is the third of 3 engagement sessions for this round of community engagement for the partnership between the City of Boston and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The purpose of this meeting is to update the community on the city's partnership and the work of the Army Corps that they've been doing and that they'll continue to do, that we will all do in collaboration. The Army Corps brings significant experience and capacity and expertise to address flood risk across the country, and we're very fortunate to have them as a partner. One of the ways that we partner with the Corps on projects is through a coastal storm risk management study. And through this study, the Corps develops and assesses approaches to long-term flood risk management. And those approaches ultimately become recommendations that are eligible for federal funding. And there is significant overlap between what the Corps can do and what the City of Boston has already been working on and what we will continue to be working on, both independently and codependently. We anticipate that the study will be complete in the spring of 2028. Starting next year, the Army Corps will begin to present concepts for long-term flood protection for public feedback. And there will be a lot of feedback sessions along the way at different points in the process, and we'll definitely keep you posted. In advance of those conversations next year, we wanted to provide this opportunity for the community to learn a bit more about the work of the Corps and the process in particular, and kind of lay the foundation for future engagement, which we will be asking for at various points along the way. And that's the purpose of today. And we're joined by several U.S. Army Corps staff today. We have Jeff Herzog, the project manager, Lisa Winter. We have Nicole Dapsik, CMAC Hagar, and Courtney Jackson, and several other staff, as Jeff will talk more about, who are not on the call today, have been hard at work on this project. Also joined by Chris Osgood, Director of the Office of Climate Resilience, Rich McGinnis, Deputy Director for Climate and Coastal Resilience Infrastructure Delivery in the Planning Department, where I am as well. And again, thank you all. There'll be a Q&A session. Well, first, some tips for Zoom, actually. I'm sure you're all familiar, but we'll talk about it for a second anyway. You'll be muted. There will be a Q&A at the end. You can raise your hand to unmute. We'll go ahead and unmute you. You can ask your question. This meeting is being recorded, and at least one of these sessions will be posted on the project website you see here so that you can go in and watch it again. And we'll also be compiling a list of questions and answers from across all 3 sessions that we'll post as well. So the agenda for today, starting with 2 here, we'll talk a bit about Climate Ready Boston, kind of the origin of a lot of this work, update on the progress, key projects. Then we'll talk about the partnership. Then we'll dive into Jeff's presentation on the Army Corps of Engineers work, and then we'll have a Q&A. So first, a bit about Climate Ready Boston. Before diving into the details, we really wanted to just provide more context on how the Army Corps work fits into our overall coastal resilience strategy. Coastal resilience work is not new in Boston. In 2016, we published the CRB report, Climate Ready Boston, which highlighted the risks that climate change poses: more days of extreme heat, more extreme precipitation events, and increased coastal flooding due to both sea level rise and storm surge. As charted in that report, we will see coastal flooding in Boston, and the depth of that flooding will increase over the course of the century if left unaddressed. And that's really the piece that we'll focus on in this presentation. That's the focus of how the Corps is assisting us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff briefly to talk about these flood projections before providing a bit more context on the work happening in the city.
Yeah, hey, thanks. Good morning, everybody, and I appreciate you all taking time out of your busy Saturday morning. I realize this is one of the few days out of the week that we get to spend with our family, and so I appreciate you choosing to take this hour and a half and spending it with us to learn more about this project. What you see here on the screen are that we're calling them sea level rise projections. We tend to use the term relative sea level change, and that's because when you have sea levels rising as well as subsidence, it's not necessarily just the sea level rise that's creating the risk, as well as if you're in the Arctic or in Alaska, then you're actually seeing isostatic rebound, which is the opposite of sea level rise. So we do refer to it as sea level change throughout our discussions. But what you see here are 5 different kind of projections. The blue triangles along that top row right there, that is the most up-to-date Woods Hole Group Consultants Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. This is what the state is currently using, and it's what most folks in New England are actually starting to transition to and use as kind of their projections. And then below that, you see these red triangles, and this is actually what was produced out of the Boston Climate Resilience Boston. And this uses the same Woods Hole Group model. However, the data is slightly older, and it actually comes from the same AdCirc model, but the projections and the data was updated for the blue Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. So the red triangles were actually from the Boston Harbor Flood Risk Model. And then you see 3 solid lines that kind of straddle and fall in line. And these are the USACE, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, sea level change projections. Now, what you'll notice here is no matter which line you're looking at, they all have an upward trend. No one here is going to tell you that sea level change is not occurring. It's a matter of when will it reach certain levels, and that's due to certain anthropologic indications, as well as historic data and where people get their data from. And so right now you'll see that the red line, that is the high scenario, lines up pretty close to that Boston Harbor flood risk model, and that's because a lot of that data came from the same time and the same time periods as far as evaluating trends. And then the 2 scenarios below that, the intermediate and the low. What our plan is for this study is to look at our alternatives and our recommendations and compare them to the high scenario and the intermediate scenario, as well as run a sensitivity analysis against that low scenario. And the reason being is people use different projections and sea level change curves for different reasons. Are you looking to educate and outreach? Are you looking to prioritize infrastructure and capital improvement projects? Are you looking to create policy and procedures and zoning requirements? Depending as to what you're using for, you may choose to or need to use a more aggressive curve, and that's why it's important to have different scenarios to be able to run sensitivity analysis to make informed decisions and not just assume based off of the most catastrophic or high-risk scenario, and then you find yourself not being able to afford, or you're going to create a scenario where you're not able to adapt in the future, and you have to take such an aggressive approach that it has a significant impact on the community today for a threat that's 100 years from now. So that's why we use different projections, and this is just kind of a snapshot of comparing the Woods Hole Group MCFRM, which is the regional model being used with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And as we get through the presentation a little bit further, you'll see that there's a lot of correlation between the work being done regionally, state, and locally, as well as with the Corps of Engineers, and it's going to allow for a very comprehensive and complete recommendation as we move forward. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ben and allow him to continue, and I will talk some more in a little bit.
Thanks, Jeff. So what you see here on the screen are 6 photos of Boston's coastline flooding. We've seen flooding multiple times: Dorchester, South Boston, downtown Charlestown, East Boston. Really, anywhere on the coast has experienced some flooding event at some point due to a coastal storm. And even in many areas, like Long Wharf, for instance, just high tides alone will overtop existing infrastructure. And that's why it's really important to, the work that we've been doing is kind of looking at each one of these locations in great detail. And the city of Boston's been doing this for almost a decade now, just really making sure that we're doing what we can to prevent these kinds of things from being overly catastrophic. it's not unique to Boston, of course. Cities all over the country and the world are experiencing these kinds of events, but we're here, and you can, go out during a storm event or during high tide and see it firsthand, and it's really quite it's interesting. It's a unique time in history to be approaching this topic. So great that we're doing all this work. With that, I'll hand it over to Chris Osgood.
Ben, thank you so much. And good morning to all of you. Just echo Ben and Jeff, really appreciate all of you spending a portion of your Saturday morning with all of us. So I'm Chris Osgood. I have the great pleasure of leading the Office of Climate Resilience, working with Ben, with Rich McGinnis, with Jeff Herzog on this project. And before turning it back over to Jeff for the bulk of this presentation, and then to all of you for your questions and your comments and your feedback, I wanted to provide a little bit more context, as Ben said, about the work which the city is doing. And that really starts with understanding the flood risk to Boston. So a moment ago, Jeff showed the projections of sea level rise over time here in our city. The map on the left is one that many of you I know in this meeting are very familiar with. It shows a projection of where we would expect to see flooding in the city of Boston at 2 different time periods. In that sort of darker hatched area in that map, those are places where we would expect to see flooding at a 1% annual flood event here in our city. And the places in lighter blue are places during a 1% flood event. We would expect to see flooding after about 40 inches of sea level rise. And 40 inches of sea level rise is roughly what we project between the start of this century and the 2070s. Obviously, this maps quite closely with some of the lower lying areas across our city, places that have been filled in over time. 1/6 of Boston is built on filled land. And that impact of flooding, as we all know very directly, and as Ben pointed out, is not just sort of a future projection, but is something which is impacting all of us today, has a significant impact on our homes and our businesses, on people and on communities, which is why together, and I recognize a number of the folks who are with us this morning have been sort of instrumental in a lot of the plans that you see on the right side of this slide. The right side of this slide shows 5 neighborhood plans that were developed by the city in collaboration with the community, looking at a set of solutions and a sequence for those solutions that really address the flood risk and also continue to invest in the neighborhoods and this harbor that we love. If you go to the next slide, Ben, these plans together essentially articulate a vision for 47 miles worth of work across Boston's harborfront. That is sort of highlighted in that sort of green, a set of projects that not only ensure a greater degree of resilience, but by doing that, don't wall off the city and our community from this asset that we love, but continue to find ways to make sure that as we make our harborfront more resilient, as we reduce that coastal flood risk, we also are investing in solutions that improve access to that waterfront, whether it is for recreational purposes or cultural ones or economic ones, and also continue to invest in solutions that actually improve the environment and ecology of the harbor itself, which obviously collectively we've spent a tremendous amount of time and effort doing. This vision, which was laid out in those plans, is one which obviously we've already started taking steps to implement. On the screen here, you see 3 demonstration projects many of you are familiar with and have helped implement. Includes McConnell Park in Dorchester, Martins Park in the Fort Point Channel, and Langone Park in the North End. To think about how these projects are delivering on those 3 shared goals of increased resilience, improved access, and enhanced ecology. Each of those are ways in which we are trying to advance those objectives. To look at the example at Langone Park, for example, as in that image in the lower right, that sort of stepped set of seating that you see in Langone Park is a beautiful place to sit at sort of any sunset or throughout the week. But it also serves as a portion of the flood wall during an extreme weather event that helps protect the North End neighborhood. And it's that type of project that we are looking to develop across our city that both continues to invest in the neighborhood in the way in which our community members want us to be developing our coastal properties, but does so in a way that reduces flood risk over time. If you go up to the next slide, Ben, as we do this work, we have 3 concurrent strategies that are taking place at the same time, but have different time horizons. One is focused on how we address today's storms. This is work which is largely being led by our Office of Emergency Management, and I will touch on briefly, but really is focused on a set of preparedness and response efforts that will be led by the city in support of our residents to make sure that we're able to handle some of the extreme weather events which may be coming our way. The second set of work is really a set of work which is being led by the city in collaboration with our partners at the state, which is a set of nearer term capital projects that address the flood paths that exist today. These are places where, as Ben showed on that slide, where our city is either experiencing flooding today or where there's a significant risk of flooding in the nearer term. We want to make sure that in advance of the work, which would be done in collaboration with the Army Corps, that we are taking steps to address that risk. And the third set of work is really the focus of this conversation. It's a longer set of work, which Jeff will go more into, that is about the more significant infrastructure investments that ensure a higher level of protection and risk reduction against coastal flooding for our community for a large part of this century. Jump to the next slide, Ben. Just to briefly touch on that sort of first category, the work which is being led by the Office of Emergency Management to address storm risk today. They are doing a tremendous amount of work to both update the city's natural hazard preparedness plans. They are increasing their community outreach, including a set of new tools which they've brought on to communicate flood risk to constituents, as well as a new set of events, including the city's first ever Deployables Day. This was a one-day event this fall for owners of deployable flood walls to be able to put those flood walls up around their properties as a training exercise as we head into winter, knowing that it is during winter that we often see the most significant flood events in our city. And then they're also doing some increased citywide coordination. And I do encourage everybody, if you are not already, to sign up for Alert Boston, which is our Office of Emergency Management's communication tool around extreme weather events or other emergency preparedness efforts. Jump to the next slide, Ben, and I'll go through these very quickly before turning it over to Jeff. That near-term work that our Office of Emergency Management is doing is complemented by a set of significant capital projects that the city is leading in collaboration with a number of partners across all 5 of the neighborhoods that are highlighted in this work. This includes things like Tinian Beach, collaboration with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, Morrissey Boulevard, a project which we are doing with MassDOT and with DCR, McConnell Park, which we have touched on. Ben, if you hop to the next slide. A set of work in South Boston, including work being led by our Parks Department at Moakley Park, including some parcels that are adjacent to Moakley Park that provide an additional level of protection for residents in that area. Work being led by our Planning Department at both the Flynn Marine Park and at Fort Point Channel, and obviously the completed Martins Park. Hopping to downtown, some work in collaboration that sort of centers on Long Wharf, but we want to be doing in collaboration with both the North End community and the Wharf District Council to address some of the flood risk in downtown. And then, Ben, sorry, if you hop to the next slide. And then the completed work at Langone Park. Just to touch briefly on Charlestown and then East Boston. In Charlestown, our planning department will shortly be kicking off a study focused on the Charlestown Navy Yard to address some of the flood risk there. And then we do expect later this month to be breaking ground on our on Ryan Playground, which is the next project being done by our Parks Department, both to improve this incredible neighborhood asset, but also to reduce flood risk in the Sullivan Square area. And then that last slide is really just highlighting a set of work which is either completed or ongoing in East Boston, including work by Massport at Pierce Park 2, and a set of projects being led by the city at Border Street, Lewis Street, and at Bennington Street. All of these projects that I sort of just raced through are sort of often the projects that we are having community meetings about, and happy to sort of provide more information about any of those. You can also find all of those projects on the city's climate resilience webpage, boston.gov/climate resilience, and the tracker that is associated on that page that sort of highlights this work, and you can learn more about the details there and get connected with any of those projects. Those are the projects which we are doing really to address the flood risk that we are experiencing in many places in our city today. And they're going to be complemented by a set of work which we are doing with the Army Corps. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff to go more into detail about the collaboration with the Army Corps. Really appreciate all of you being here with us this morning, and really appreciate the fact that So many of you are not just with us this morning, but have been with us for years in building these plans and developing these projects, and look forward to the partnership ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hey, and just for everyone's, I do these projects across the nation. I'm currently supporting teams across the nation. I will tell you that working with a partner like the City of Boston and Boston Planning Agency has been really refreshing because of the fact that they recognize there are storms today, there's going to be storms tomorrow, and then there's the long-term risk. And that just partnering with the Corps of Engineers, as much as we want to break ground tomorrow, we have a process that we go through. It's a deliberate process in order to make a recommendation to Congress, and then Congress has to make recommendations and fund recommendations. And so often working with the Corps of Engineers is not the today solution, it's the tomorrow solution. So given the leadership of the City of Boston and the work that they're working with many of you already on is critical to making sure that today's risk and tomorrow's risk are both considered and evaluated and managed. And real quick, when I talk about risk, just for context, what I mean is you have the hazard, and then the risk of that hazard equals the probability of the hazard occurring times the consequence. And so what is the likelihood of it happening, and then how bad is it when it's going to happen? That's going to be important context as we continue to move forward. So let's go to the next slide, Ben. And while you're taking a look at who the key leaders of my team are, I'll also point out that there is a Q&A opportunity in the chat. The chat feature is now actually enabled. We've chosen to use it as a Q&A, and that way we can kind of better keep track. So if you want to put any questions or comments in the chat, we will definitely take a look and address those as we go. My name is Jeff Herzog. I'm the lead project manager as well as the lead plan formulator for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers New England District, which our home is out of Concord, Massachusetts. In that top right, we have two environmental leads. The person you see in the picture is Todd Randall, and he's the one working kind of the face with resource agencies, both at the state and the federal level. Lisa Winter is my true partner in crime. She is the engineering project manager, technical lead engineer. She wears many hats, but she is also a national asset. Just like me, doing projects across the nation, she is considered a coastal resilience and preparedness expert across the entire U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we're really lucky to have her. And then Courtney Jackson is our lead economist. And if you're not familiar with the core process, it's not necessarily just dollars and cents. Courtney is going through an extensive process to not only look at the monetary return on investment, but also to look at the socioeconomic impacts and the socioeconomic return on investments in order to make sure that we recommend the project to Congress that maximizes that opportunity. So we actually have 25 to 30 people on the team. But these are kind of the key figures that you'll see mostly in your engagement with us. This slide here, the takeaway from this slide is that the Corps of Engineers does not operate unilaterally when it comes to civil works projects and community projects such as the Coastal Storm Risk Management Study here in the City of Boston. We require a congressional authorization, particular for this study. It was actually using an authorization from a 1962 Senate resolution that allows the Corps of Engineers to partner with communities to study the entire Massachusetts coastline. However, we're using a portion of that authority to partner with the City of Boston. And then we require an appropriation. And so if you're familiar with funding appropriations, typically it happens either through one large omnibus or multiple smaller bills. But this study was funded in 2022, and we are funded for 6 years, and $3 million federal as well as a partnership, $3 million non-federal. And that's the third leg of the stool. With only two legs, the stool falls over, but with a third leg, you have a sturdy base and a great partnership. So when I say non-federal partner, I mean partner. The City of Boston is not only contributing significant cash contributions, but they are significantly engaged in the study, providing in-kind contributions and labor and expertise. And so that's that other leg of the stool. We are authorized to build upon Climate Ready Boston in order to address coastal storm risk, as well as sea level change induced risk with the coastal storms. So that's to say we are a single purpose study. We are not necessarily looking at aquatic ecosystem restoration. We are not necessarily looking at stormwater and interior drainage. We are not necessarily looking at greenhouse gas emissions. However, we understand that the city, the state, and a lot of local agencies and quasi-government agencies, that is what they're looking at. And so as we move through this process, this is why this engagement and this partnership is so important, to ensure that while we're seeking to meet our congressional authorization and charge from Congress, that we blend and create comprehensive plans that meet the larger whole of government approach to risk management. You'll hear us often say a 50-year period of economic analysis. And so there's multiple periods that we examine over. However, for economics, because there's so much uncertainty, what we typically look at is from the year we project the project to be constructed, we look out 50 years and project the economic return on investment as well as socioeconomic impacts and opportunities. And so that's the 50 years doesn't mark the year that the project gets taken out or fails. That simply marks the where we have the highest level of confidence in our economic modeling. And then we do project beyond that out to a full planning horizon, which is a 50 years beyond that initial period of analysis. And that's the reasonable life of the project. Again, if you look around the country, if you look around Boston, there are projects that have been operating very well and maintained for longer than 100 years. So let's not, I put this bullet and this talking point in there because a lot of people use that as an opportunity to question what we're doing. And the reality is data is only as good as you can insert into your models and analyze the output. So ultimately, different than Climate Ready Boston, where Climate Ready Boston put together a lot of strategies and recommendations, and they're continuing to move forward with their projects. This outcome will have a recommendation to the Chief of Engineers, Lieutenant General William Butch Graham, who will then make a recommendation to Congress to implement a specific project or series of projects throughout the Boston Harbor coastline in order to manage coastal storm risk into the future. So next slide, Ben. All right, so this is a very simple arrow, but I am going to go into a little bit more detail, and so that way you can kind of see the picture that this arrow is trying to paint. We started with Climate Ready Boston and all of the engagement that the city has already done over the last 8 years across the different neighborhoods. And we evaluated that, looking at our authority and looking at the risk, and identified the scope of our study. And so that was that first red dot that you see there. In February of 2023, we identified officially with our Washington headquarters that there is a federal interest in evaluating and managing flood risk associated with coastal storms in the city of Boston along the 47 miles of Boston Harbor. And so they gave us the go-ahead, say, go forth, do great things, and start to paint your future without project condition. What does it look like if we do not invest? Clearly, the city of Boston, the state of Massachusetts, as well as Boston Water Sewer Commission, all of these private entities, everyone understands the risk, and they're starting to move forward. So as we paint that future without project condition, we need to take into consideration all of that work, but we also need to look at the hazard and what's going to happen over time. And we create models for that. And we'll go into the models and pictures that we're creating here in a little bit. But that gets us to where we're at right now, that blue star. We've completed our engineering model, and we're going to go over that in just a moment. And we're starting to use that engineering model in the floodplain and the water surface elevations to now evaluate what are those economic and socioeconomic impacts. But as we're doing that, our model is going to tell us some great data. Who has better data? You all in the community and as stakeholders and as local agencies, non-government agencies who have been doing this work for much longer than we have. You have that traditional ecological knowledge. You have that subject matter expertise. Stone Living Labs is on. It's a great opportunity for us to start talking because we want to be able to validate what is the engineering and the modeling data showing us, the science and engineering, versus what is the local expert showing, and we can create a more comprehensive puzzle and picture of the puzzle from that. So that's where we're at with this blue star and this initial round of engagement. Once we understand what our future without project condition, then we can start really looking at what recommendations do we have and how do those recommendations compare so that we can do a trade-off analysis to make sure we recommend the right plan that balances and maximizes benefits, opportunities, and risk reduction for the city. And so that's kind of that next red dot that you see there. There will be, once we start making recommendations, and to answer your questions, if you're familiar with Climate Ready Boston, yes, all of those recommendations are part of what we're considering, as well as we will look at within our authority and within what the Corps of Engineers has done across the nation, what are other solutions that could potentially work to manage risk in the city of Boston. And so with that comes another round of engagement. Once we complete that kind of analysis and compare and trade-off of what could work, we will select a plan. That plan will include a draft release of the public report for the community, and it'll include another round of engagement, but it's going to include an opportunity for the community, stakeholders, resource agencies, state, federal, to review and make comments. At that same time, we're going to go through a significant peer review, agency technical review process on our side. And so what we're looking at right now is probably April of 2026 is when that kind of concurrent review period and opportunity is going to occur. And we call that the draft release. We will take all of the feedback and the comments, and then we move to that red dot that's called feasibility analysis. So we will look at all the feedback from the technical review, from the peer review, from the environmental review, from the public review, and we will refine our recommendation in order to get to a level of design necessary for Congress to say, I'm going to give you this much money, go forth, do great things, and initiate some risk management for the city of Boston along the Boston Harbor coastline. That's that feasibility level of analysis that we need to get to. Once we get to that level of detail and information, that's when we submit our large thousands of pages of data and information and community engagement and feedback. And we're going to submit that to our Washington level team for a state and agency review, federal agency review, congressional review, OMB review. And based off of that review, our Chief of Engineers, Lieutenant General Graham, will then make a recommendation to Congress in what's called a Chief's Report. That Chief's Report is the document that allows for Congress to authorize the project in legislation as well as fund the project through an appropriation bill. That's when Congress comes to us and says, go forth and build. That we're looking at spring of 2028 for the completion of this study. Now, if you're familiar with the NEPA process, you're probably asking yourself, how does that come into play, right? Are we going to go all the way to spring of 2028 and then request permitting and do an EIS? No. When you work with the Corps of Engineers in a feasibility study like this, the NEPA process parallels the study process, and we will create integrated documents. So we call it an integrated feasibility report with an environmental impact either assessment or a statement. One assessment results in a FONSI, a finding of no significant impacts, whereas an EIS results in a record decision, or ROD. Are we saying that we're going to create an EA and it's going to be sufficient for this large of a study area? Absolutely not. However, we're not being pre-decisional at this point because the NEPA analysis may tell us different things throughout. Once we identify for sure that it is an EIS or that it will be one comprehensive EIS, at that point we will initiate the public scoping period, likely sometime before that feasibility analysis red dot. If I've got a crystal ball in front of me, I'm telling you early winter or fall of 2025 is when we would initiate that public scoping period, in which case we would say, here's the problems that we've been talking about and collaborating on. Here's the suite of recommendations that we've been talking about and collaborating on. Now, here's an official kind of opportunity for you to comment so that way we can then go through the formal NEPA process in order to reach a record of decision 2 years in order to meet the CEQ, Council for Environmental Quality requirements of 2 years from determining your environmental impacts to a record of decision. And so at the end of that Washington level review, when we get that Chief of Engineers report, that will also include a record of decision if it is in fact an EIS. Again, I'm not trying to be a pie in the sky optimist and saying that we're going to be able to do all this work for FONSI and an EA, but at the same time, it's important for us to do our due diligence and our environmental analysis in order to determine what level of NEPA decision making is necessary. So that's kind of how the feasibility study process parallels the NEPA process, and why 4 red dots are certainly not as simple as it is. There's a lot that's going to happen between those 4 red dots. So I'm happy to answer questions in the chat, or we can have open dialogue discussions in a few minutes. But in the meantime, let's jump to the next slide, because this is where I start to get excited. We are, just like the Climate Ready Boston, looking at all 5 neighborhoods. You may refer to North End as something different. You may refer to South Boston as something different. For us, the easiest way to do it was to line up our 5 neighborhoods with the Climate Ready Boston. And then we will create kind of aggregated areas within those 5 neighborhoods. We're looking at sea level change. Are we looking at sea level change from the perspective of sunny day flooding and astronomical tides? Maybe not, but that's why Climate Ready Boston and Boston Water Sewer Commission, with precip modeling and interior drainage modeling, they are looking at these things. So we can combine our efforts in order to create a comprehensive recommendation. We're looking at structures not only at risk today, but we're looking at structures at risk in the floodplain over the next 100 years. Next slide. How do we do that? We do that by doing some engineering modeling. This is why I get excited about this partnership, because the red model, that's that MCFRM, and it's a 1% frequency event looking out and projecting out to 2070. And you look at that, and then you look at the black arrows. Those are all those flood pathway entries. If you're familiar with Climate Ready Boston, this should look familiar to you, because this is a lot of the work that was used in Climate Ready Boston. However, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we don't use the MCFRM model, because we have to look at it from a life cycle perspective. We have to look at it from a average or mean or median high water level over time, and then we look at surge, sea level change, overtopping. We look at several different things, but then we take those engineering outputs and we have to plug it into our Generation 2 coastal risk model. If you're familiar with the Corps of Engineers studies at all, we commonly refer to this as G2 CRM. But what that model then does is it takes all the engineering inputs. It takes the structure inventory. If you're not familiar, there are over 18,000 structures in our national database. That seems like a high number, but the reality is it's probably a very low number, because those are only the structures that have been reported and tracked at the national level. So there are likely combination, multi-structures, multiple structures. There's some new development, there's new infill development. And so that number is actually probably quite low. But when you think about 18,000 structures over the city of Boston in our study area, in our floodplain, that's a lot of economic and monetary damage. But there's also a lot of socioeconomic damages. Every time there's a storm and a business has to shut down, if a business has to close for 3 days, all those hourly wage employees, that could be a week's worth of groceries or close to a month's worth of rent. There's socioeconomic impacts there. And that's where our economic modeling, we can use kind of inputs, outputs, and methodology to interpolate that data and come up with information. But that's why we can't use the MCFRM data, because it doesn't plug into our economic data. But when you see this picture, all of that purple is where the floodplain of the MCFRM and our coastal hazard system model, that CHS model, that's where it overlaps. It uses the same kind of mesh, AdCirc mesh resolution down to a 10-meter square. It looks at the data very similarly, although one's a frequency-based and one's a life cycle model. And so the reality is the pictures match up. When the pictures match up, that means the recommendations that we recommend should be the same, or at least be able to be tied in to one another to create a comprehensive system of recommendations, whether it's constructed by the city, the state, Boston Water Sewer Commission, or the Corps of Engineers. We're working with the same information in the same picture, and therefore we should be able to tie in and create that comprehensive line of defense. And so that's why I get really excited by this. This is the northern part of the study area, just to give you an idea how big we're truly looking at. From Belle Isle Marsh and the Winthrop and the Revere area, in East Boston, all the way across. Chelsea itself is not part of our study area, however, Chelsea Creek is. And then you got the Mystic River, Little Mystic Channel. You see the flood risk there for that Section 8 affordable housing community there. You see Charlestown Naval Yard, downtown North End. You'll notice that there's not currently a flood pathway over there at Langone Park, reason being because Langone Park is built into this flood model. So as we move to the southern part of the study area on the next slide, Ben, you see that we move from downtown Fort Point Channel. You see where Fort Point Channel, the inundation and the flood pathways through Fort Point Channel, it extends all the way back up into Charlestown and the Back Bay area. And then you have South Boston Seaport, the Ray Flynn Marine and Reserve Channel right there, Mowgli Park, Dorchester Bay City, down around Morrissey Boulevard, down across the Morrissey Boulevard Bridge, all the way up into, you see at the very bottom down there, we go up into the Neponset River. Quincy's not part of the study area, but Dorchester is. And if you're not familiar, Dorchester, 19 of the 26 census tracts within this community of Dorchester is considered environmental justice. When I say environmental justice, in fact, let's go to the next slide. When I talk about environmental justice, I'm talking about those communities that in the past historically have disproportionately been impacted or neglected, economically disadvantaged communities, historically minority communities, linguistic isolation communities. And if that sounds like President Biden's EJ40 initiative, it's because the two do run in parallel. One is his initiative as the administration, and one is the Corps of Engineers policy that we've actually been working on for several years. And so how are we going to intervene? What does this intervention look like? What does this risk reduction look like? Here are some examples of strategies. These are very much the same strategies or similar strategies to what Climate Ready Boston and other organizations are recommending. Where we differ is we are focused on coastal storm risk and sea level change. The city of Boston or others may be focused on open space, may be focused on utility resilience, may be focused on affordable housing, may be focused on. And so it's important for us to look at our recommendations and identify where is the overlap, where are the differences, and how can we bridge the gap between those differences and the recommendation. So we may be looking at raised harbor walks. If you're familiar with the fact that the City of Boston has miles of existing public use harbor walks throughout the city, and we understand and recognize the connectedness to the water and the importance of that waterfront from an economic but also from a social perspective. Raised berms and dunes. I like to use Bennington Street and Belle Isle Marsh as an example. If we were to put down in that lower left corner a nice wall, that wall would protect Bennington Street, absolutely. But Belle Isle Marsh is already changing. Sea level change is going to change what that marsh looks like in the future. If we put a vertical wall there, that vertical wall is going to exacerbate that change and potentially have adverse impacts on the existing marsh habitat today, but also the marsh opportunities in the future. And so we wouldn't want to do that. If we could put a slope there, some sort of sloped level of protection that protects the road, protects Suffolk Downs behind the road, but also allows for opportunities or adaptation of the marsh in the future, that's probably, the direction you want to go. But you can't go down Seaport Boulevard and put a berm there. There's just not enough space. So in certain areas, it's going to require some permanent flood barrier in the form of some sort of wall. The key is to blend that wall into the existing aesthetic and make sure that it's not creating sightline issues, and that it's not creating additional community safety issues or those types of risks. In the lower right, you'll see adapt buildings. When we talk about managed retreat, that means I'm not buying your property today and saying, let's get rid of this entire community and send them elsewhere. There's only so much room in the city of Boston. There's only so much room to grow and continue to flourish. If you look at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital, if you look at World Trade Center Boston, both of those are great examples of building adaptation. Building adaptation means, remember when I talked about risk equals probability times consequence? If I stop the water from coming in, i.e. a berm or a wall or a raised harbor walk, I'm reducing the probability of that hazard from occurring and having the consequence. That's how I'm managing that risk. If I adapt the building, I'm not stopping the water from coming in. We know the water's going to come in. However, I'm elevating all my mechanical, electrical, fire suppression infrastructure. I'm creating a safe place for the building occupants to be outside of the floodplain, and therefore they're safe, they're dry. I am reducing the consequence of that hazard from occurring. And so I'm still managing the risk, I'm just doing it by managing the consequence and not the probability. Now, am I going to go in and elevate every structure in Boston and say, I've solved your problems? No, for two reasons. Number one, that's entirely too expensive, and a lot of the structures can't be adapted because of their historical nature and the foundation of their construction. Number two, Boston is not New Jersey, New York. Boston is not Miami. Boston is not Louisiana. The threat that is the greatest threat to the city of Boston are nor'easters, those extratropical events that could last anywhere from 6 to 12 hours up to 96 hours, 4 days. That's 4 days where someone could be trapped. That's 4 days where your public transportation infrastructure is just being inundated and hammered through multiple tide cycles. That's 4 days where people can't get to work. That's 4 days where people can't get to the hospital, and emergency services are reduced in their effectiveness. So the idea that I'm going to recommend to Congress a full non-structural building adaptation type alternative is not likely going to happen. However, there are particular areas where elevation and adaptation have proven successful, and there is an opportunity to defend in place behind and create that line of protection. But certain structures, it's either too expensive, too environmentally impactful, or whatever the case may be, it just doesn't make sense to try and include them in a line of protection. So for those structures, we would recommend some sort of building adaptation. These are all, there's so many different considerations if we go to the next slide as to which solution are we going to recommend for what areas. We've got 5 neighborhoods. Within those 5 neighborhoods, we probably have another 15 to 20 different specific areas that we have to look at. We have to look at sea level change. We have to look at the real estate impacts. Because with a structural solution, with a solution that reduces the probability, there is an easement requirement, there are future easements and limited use requirements for those properties. And so we have to take into consideration real estate impacts. We have to take into consideration future infill development. Boston's not the only place. Seaport and South Boston area, that's not the only place in the U.S. that's taking old warehouse and industrial and creating loft space and creating housing and affordable housing. And it's because, again, your tax jurisdiction is only so big. There's only so much space. And so with the housing need and the population growth, there is a need to transform some of those previous use to new use. And that's what that future infill development looks like. Whether you agree with it or not, Boston's not the only place that it's occurring. It's occurring in other places such as Tampa and the Port of Tampa area, as well as New York and across the nation. Navigation and port related, Boston Harbor. It's the busiest port in the New England region. You don't want to create a massive storm surge barrier that's closed. That, number one, it takes 12 hours to close. Number two, it creates, you're closing it 10 to 15 times a year. And number three, as it's closing or as it's opening or while it's closed, you can't get goods and services in and out of the Port of Boston. So we have to consider those. We have to consider the impacts on Belle Isle Marsh, Wood Isle Marsh, Neponset Creek, Neponset River, Pine Creek. All of those environmental conditions, we have to take those into consideration. Evacuation corridors. Yes, it's a coastal threat. Yes, you have 24 to 72 hours notice to get out of the way of the storm. However, there is still a need to be able to access areas. And so if we turn Charlestown into an island, if we turn East Boston into an island, there is still a lot of risk residual. We talked about EJ communities. We talked about flood pathways. If we cut off flood pathways, then it's a matter of the city and Boston Water Sewer Commission. They focus on interior drainage, stormwater, and evacuating the water. And so it's a balance there. And so these are a lot of these considerations. But the way we figure out these considerations is by not only using science and engineering data, but also asking a lot of questions and working with the community. And that's where we get into the so what of this presentation. Next slide, Ben. What we've been doing right now is looking at our engineering future without project condition and asking ourselves questions. We're asking ourselves questions so we know what questions to ask you. And we're going to talk about in a few minutes how you can answer these questions. But over the next rest of 2024, as well as 2025, we're going to start asking these questions. Where are others already doing the work? Many of you are already involved in many projects. We need to make sure that we account for those projects for two reasons. Number one, we don't want to see your hard work and effort go to waste. And number two, if you're doing it, that means we don't have to do it. And so we can make sure that the projects and efforts tie in as opposed to diverge or replace each other. Who are the key stakeholders in the area? Navigation, longshoremen, commercial fishermen, transportation, local businesses, civic organizations, community stakeholder groups. We need to know who these folks are. We've got a good list, 65 to 70 already. But maybe you are not part of our stakeholder group, and we want to make sure that you are. Where is the federal government interest versus where is the state and the city interest? And if there's a divergence there, if there's not an overlap, if it's not clear, where are those gaps? And so that we can figure out and discuss and negotiate how are we going to close those gaps. Where can we use nature-based solutions? I will tell you that we're not going to be able to construct a living shoreline across the entire stretch of the 47 miles. There is a 10-foot tide swing. And so what works in a lot of areas across the nation won't necessarily work in the city of Boston, as well as the fact that for some nature-based solutions, you have to have a sediment transport, and you have to have a borrow area, and you have to have the necessary means to sustain that over a long period of time. Can we build you a beautiful 47 miles of a beach that's a quarter mile wide and resembles Wildwood in New Jersey? Sure, we could probably find the material one time to get it done, but then how would we maintain that into the future? So what works in other places may work here. What works in other places may not work here. We're probably not going to go out and construct 100 miles and thousands of acres of mangroves. Just because it works in Guam doesn't mean it's going to work in the city of Boston, right? So we need to investigate where can we use nature-based solutions versus where do we need to take a more structural. I like to call it a gray-green hybrid approach. We're not likely going to have a full nature-based green solution, and we're certainly not going to recommend a full gray hardened flumes and evacuate water with large pump station type approach. How do we optimize benefits? We're seeking to optimize and manage risk over 100 years. I could do that by creating massive walls and reducing the economic risk to the community. However, you all have to look at those walls. You all have to look at the impacts of my project on a daily basis. So one day out of the year, you're glad I built it. The other 364 days out of the year, you're looking at an eyesore trying to figure out what exactly is the purpose of this project. We need to figure out how to balance and what the right size solution looks like for the city of Boston. That's what we're going to be engaged with you over the next year on. And then next fall, we're going to have our recommendations. So if we go to 2025, 2026 on the next slide, we're going to have a whole suite of recommendations. And we're then going to engage with you some more. And now we're going to say, okay, this is what our future without project looks like. This is what our alternatives could look like in order to manage this risk. What are we missing? Where are the gaps in our formulation or our trade-off analysis as to why we should select this plan over this plan? If it comes down to dollars and cents, the federal government, we're going to go with the more cost-effective. If there's a reason to not go with the more cost-effective, we need to know about it. The way we're going to find out about that is by engaging you. And engaging you before we go to Congress and saying, everybody loves this project. Can we construct it now? 2027 is that feasibility level of analysis. We go through a full Washington level of review, and we really put that final package, that NEPA document / feasibility report together and say, we did it. Success. In 2028, we celebrate, but then we wait. We have to wait for Congress to say, go forth, design, and then construct. That's why it's important for the city to continue doing what they're doing with their near-term resilience projects and efforts. And just so you're tracking, every project that they're working on, they're keeping very much in touch with us, and we're considering it. Maybe it won't be constructed by the time our study's done, but we'll know where it's at, and we'll make sure that our recommendation has the ability to tie into that, to create that comprehensive full-scale system, and not just a bunch of Band-Aids and projects with gaps and weak spots. So that happens in 2028 and beyond. I've been asking you to answer questions, and so now I want to tell you how you can communicate with us today. Next slide. We've created, I'm a picture guy. I'm not the most tech savvy guy, but I'm a picture guy. And so if I can look on a map and if I can point to something and say, right here, this is where I want you to look, that's how I operate. And so with that, we've created this GIS-based feedback form. Ben's going to click on it. That's so that disclaimer right there, that disclaimer is not saying that we're going to take your information, share it with the FBI and telemarketers. No, what that's saying is please don't put personally identifiable information in there. There is a spot for you to share a phone number, and others won't be able to click on it and take your phone number. But what we don't want is personally identifiable information like your address or your social security number or your birthday, nothing like that. Because we're going to use this information to build our database of projects, but also to understand where do we need to engage, what questions are out there, what information can we provide to help clarify. So what you do is there's some instructions on the top left. If you're an agency and you have a project, go ahead and click the red button. If you've just got a question or a comment or a concern, use the green button. You'll click on the button and then you'll drag it over. So what Ben has done is he's selected the red button and he's drug it out and dropped it right there up by Langone Park. And then if you're an agency, please put your agency in there. If you're a stakeholder within an agency, put both. Or if you're just a concerned citizen, go ahead and add your name in there. All right, so now he's demonstrating the green. He's going right up there. He just dropped it near the New Charles River Dam. And so you can put your name in there. Go ahead and free text your comment or question. If you have a study or a project that you have information you want to share with us in there, put that in there, type in there. You should really look at this study and then put your contact information in there. We will contact you and we will gladly share information with you. And then I hope everybody clicks yes, but maybe this is a one and done and you're not interested in further communication, but there's a toggle down there. I would like to be included in mailing and future engagements. Click yes. You hit create. You can create multiple projects, and you'll be able to see your specific project on there or your comment or your question. Now, this is going to be a running tool, and so I would encourage you today, tomorrow, and as we go through this process, please continue to go in and add these things. But if we back out of this and return to the presentation, maybe you're not that type of person. You're not a visual person, and you work better just by typing freeform. So if you do that, then you can go over to this other option here, this question-based feedback form. And that goes to a Google Drive questionnaire created by the City of Boston. You can fill that out freeform. And if both of these options don't work for you, on the next slide, it's going to show Ben's email address and phone number. We're more than happy to just take a phone call or to take an email from you, and then we can get back to you and communicate with you that way. If you're a stakeholder group and you feel as though you need a specific discussion for your stakeholder group in a particular area of the full city, reach out to us, let us know. I will let you know that this has been a very broad brush approach to date, and that's to get the information out there to start the conversation. As we continue to move forward, we're going to start drilling down into specific areas of the city, whether it's specific areas of a neighborhood or maybe it's going to be a neighborhood-wide discussion. But it was important for us to give the same message, broad stroke, across the full city of Boston so that everybody's on the same level playing field as we start this conversation moving forward of validating our current picture and developing our future picture. Again, start of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. And at this time, that concludes the formal portion, and we have about 30 minutes for questions or comments. Folks are more than welcome to put anything in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand and Ben will unmute you and we can just have a conversation.